with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more. Saturdays with Renee.
Welcome everybody to Black Liberation Media and episode 99 of Saturdays with Renee, featuring Renee Johnston. I'm Jared Ball. Please like, share, subscribe, do all the things to support the platform. What's up, Renee? How you feeling?
Listen, I'm just glad your computer started working.
It's only with StreamYard now. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. I went through all the settings on the browser. My internet connection is like 50 times what StreamYard recommend. Like there's so many things, and then any other thing works. And then I come here and just everything just falls apart. So, but so far so good. We're here. And
and as we've learned, y'all can't be leaving me to pushing no buttons.
Well, listen, I know our guest is here, and I know we have a big show to get to, but as I definitely need you and others to watch this Jussie Smollett documentary.
I know, I saw your note. I was like, what is he talking about? So is it about the scandal, the beat up in the corner?
I mean, they interview everybody.
Really?
And it for me, because I didn't pay that much attention, it's a whole new, and it leaves with I honestly don't know. I don't know. I think I'm with XMJ. I don't know what to think. I admit I initially thought it was fugazi. I fell in with everybody that was like, oh, this is just nonsense. But then you see the rest of the story and it's like, hold up. And then you see this evidence that I had never seen before. And then so then it comes down to, is it these two Nigerian descended brothers who were paid to do it as they claim? Or is it two white men that did it? And then they show it like the cliffhanger is they have video.
Really?
But the video, when I say that, the video, it leaves inconclusive because like they show you this video, and to me, at best, it's not the Nigerian brothers. But then it's like, but everybody on screen is like, are the two people you see on this thing black or are they white? And there's competing, like it's like people are not on the same page and looking at the same video. And I mean, I don't know, the lead cop that gave that big famous press conference, he's in there. They end up reporting that he got in some trouble. I didn't know about all that. It's like, so like he looks like, everybody looks shady. Of course, it's the Chicago Police Department, but it's like, I don't know. So I don't know. It was wild. It was just wild. And then what I'll leave it with is, this is why I think we do live in a crisis, civilizational crisis of methodology. And we all got to be careful. How do we know what we know, and why do we like what we like? Because we're not doing the research. We're not following these stories as carefully as others are. The dominant narratives come out, and it could be, and
it could be anything, right?
And then I don't know what Netflix did to the story. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a Netflix documentary. So who knows, with the funky editing and this, that, and the third.
I was going to say it also with the editing. Right.
But I will say this. If you thought you knew, you don't know. That's what I'm convinced of. So, but, so anyway, Anyway, I was shocked. I honestly thought I was sitting down to watch when I saw that he was being interviewed. I was like, oh, he came clean. It's a confessional. It's his apology tour. Nah, bro. He's been consistent. His story has never changed. And he's like, I got jumped by 2 white boys.
Huh. Interesting.
I mean, it's a well-produced documentary. I mean, I think, it's I don't like, anyway, I was shocked, but I think that's my point though. That's really what it is with this and far more serious issues. I think it's a good reminder that we need to check ourselves because this is.
And the story always changes. And by the time the next story comes out, people are, they've moved on to the 80 new stories. So there's no way to track any of this stuff, man. Like you have to be there. You just have to be like little pockets of people tracking different stories and sharing it with each other to make sure that everybody's trying to stay on top of stuff because there's just be too much.
So where did the Nigerians come in? That's fascinating. And they sit down too. They're interviewed too. So you see the video from their arrest. You see the video from when they're interrogated, which is interesting. You see their movements are tracked the night of, but then you don't, but you don't know. And then their version of why they're involved is 180 degrees in opposition to what Jussie says is their reason for being involved.
Of course.
I mean, it is completely and he's like, they're lying, and they're on camera looking into the camera saying he's lying. And then the cops are like, he's lying, and we're all looking at it, but y'all are cops and Chicago cops.
Right.
So I'm never ready to believe you.
That's wild. All right. So the other question is, and sorry, Robert's here, y'all. Just
so that's
so have you watched 40 Acres yet?
I have not.
Okay. So that's got to go because I need someone to tell me.
And I had it lined up, and then I got sidetracked. So yes, I gotta come back to that.
All good. After you watch it, we'll figure out if it's me. But you're as inclined to get sucked in, So I don't know. We got somebody saying that I gotta say I disagree. I gotta say it. I disagree. But as I said, like, I don't know, man.
We were, Keontae, talking about it briefly, but
yeah,
we were talking about Jussie Smollett briefly, but we'll maybe come back at some point.
We'll circle back. So, should we bring Robert? So this is poor Robert, like waiting. Can we
40 Acres essentially military propaganda looking to make Africans in America African American. Yikes!
But it's not in the U.S. The movie's in Canada. It's a good
Whoops.
So, the military thing is something that bothers me. Agreed, but it's not in America. The movie's it's not in America. So, anywho, after you watch it, we can circle back because it's interesting. But for now, so we don't have Robert waiting too long, unless there's something else you wanted to do.
No, that's it. Okay. I've held us up enough, and I apologize and beg everyone's forgiveness. If we're ready, I can bring Robert up and welcome Robert Stubblefield back to the program. Good to see you again.
Likewise. Great to see you. Thank you for having me. And I gotta say, now I gotta add that documentary on my list of documentaries to watch. So that because I remember when the Jussie Smollett incident, was all over the place. It was all over the news, and I'm just like, Ooh boy, some of the things that came out around the time, like allegedly, and I gotta say allegedly, was that he did it because he wanted to see if he could get a pay increase for his time on Empire, even though he was getting paid like $100K an episode. And I'm just like, $100K an episode, bro. Like, you're fine. But now, Jared, you got my interest peaked. So
they address your point, Robert. Your questions will be answered, and by him and others. So but again, I promise you, whatever anyone thinks about it, my point about the broader lesson will hold. You will walk away realizing I may not have the story the way I thought I had the story. There's zero chance, even if your conclusions don't change, there's zero chance you walk away from this thinking I had the whole story. So that's the only thing I'm 100% sure of, because after watching it, I don't know what's going on.
I bet. Gotcha.
And everybody looks shady. That's the other thing. Like everybody could be doing everything. Everybody, it could be a whole set of other things happening. But anyway, yeah, it was a fun 90 minutes. I'm not gonna front. It was riveting.
Yeah.
And I don't watch Empire. I don't know nothing about his career. Like I didn't care nothing about none of it.
Yeah, I wasn't really super familiar with him when the whole thing went down. So yeah.
So for me, it's more about this media lesson and political lesson, and a reminder that we can be easily manipulated, and we really do have to check ourselves on what we think we understand about anything. So yeah,
I agree.
Definitely email when you watch it. I look forward. Send a note.
I got you.
Right. So Robert, very quickly, if you want to reintroduce yourself for the folks who aren't here often enough, because you're like a regular now, which I'm a fan of. And then before we talk about what's happening, I have to tell you how me pushing buttons is a problem. But I want you to introduce yourself first, and then we can circle back to other stuff.
Okay, sure, absolutely. So, my name is Robert. If you want to know my pronouns are he, him, destroy the empire. I am an organizer with the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. That's my primary role. Because we're a small grassroots organization, I do wear many hats. I've been chair of the Juneteenth Planning Committee. I've also helped out with the research, and I've also helped chair, and I still chair the reparations committee that BACC established. We actually 2 years ago launched in Montgomery County the local reparations movement with a study and action plan for Montgomery County. And BACC, a little bit about Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, we are fighting to stop the ongoing desecration of a historic African-American cemetery in Bethesda. And not only do we want to stop the desecration, we're fighting for the return of the land so we can establish a proper museum memorial that will educate the community about what has happened, as well as about the resilience of a once thriving Black working class community on River Road.
All right.
No, Montgomery County.
Montgomery County, Maryland. We're located in Montgomery County, Maryland, just to clarify. I know there's a lot of Montgomerys, but I'm talking about Montgomery County, Maryland. And I'm going to touch on the history of the state of Maryland. A lot of people may or may not be aware, but Maryland is part of the South. In fact, Maryland was one of the first Southern states. In fact, Maryland was the state that set the tone for the rest of the Deep South. For instance, back in the year 1638, the Maryland General Assembly established what was called the Doctrine of Exclusion. The Doctrine of Exclusion pretty much meant that they are not going to recognize Black people as human beings. One of the ways that they did this was mater sanguinis, or blood of the mother. It pretty much meant that if your mom was enslaved, congratulations, you were enslaved. It didn't matter who your dad was. It didn't matter if you were baptized. If your mother was enslaved, you were enslaved. And there's a reason why they did that. And then we're going to get into I know we're going to talk more about the struggle for Moses and the upcoming court dates, but I want to get into the history because I think that's very important. Because prior to 1638, under English common law, if you were the product of illegitimacy, right? And under English common law at that time, whoever your father was, they had to provide for schooling and apprenticeship. So let's I'm going to use Jared as an example. Let's say Jared owned like one of the largest tobacco plantations in Darnestown, Maryland, right? And let's say I am the product of
Why I got to
between
be the
him.
plantation owner?
I mean, well, because you're here. I'm
Why I
sorry. I'm
got to
sorry.
be, no, just playing.
Okay. I mean, okay. Sorry. And let's say I'm the product of his illegitimacy. Well, and it's common knowledge. Well, under Maryland law, prior to 1638, he had to provide for my schooling. When I came of age, around 12, 13 years old, he had to provide me an apprenticeship. And if I got married, he also had to provide me some land. And get this, when he passed, if he had other kids with his wife, because I was recognized as his common law son, that meant that I was entitled to a fifth of his estate. What that was doing was that it was creating a class of free and wealthy blacks. And so the state of Maryland was like, no, we can't have that. So that's why they did the doctrine of exclusion, which meant that you're born on the condition of your mother. So if your mother was enslaved, you're enslaved. And it didn't matter who your father was, you still were enslaved, regarded as a slave in perpetuity. So that's important, because that goes into African American history, and that is, are we considered human beings, or are they just considered us like a free labor source?
Okay. No, that is important history. And that could bring in so many things. We just spent those 3 hours listening to these people talking about how we all free now. We can do whatever we want. Life is different now, Lord. Anywho, so before we go into everything, I owe you an apology, because Jared was unavailable last week when you graced us, and we had that really good conversation about, the cemeteries and the desecration and some of the history. And there was so much information in that like 1 hour that we packed in. And I realized this morning when I went to ask Jared to add the link to the show notes that whatever I did, the video exists. It just doesn't exist on YouTube, because clearly there was some button that I was supposed to press that I didn't press. And so, Jared, in your email is me telling you that I did something wrong, and the video's in the library in StreamYard, but it is not anywhere on the channel. And it's definitely my fault. And it's unfortunate, because it was such a good conversation and there was so much information. So at some point, Jared's going to have to fix it, because whatever. But it does exist. At least whatever I did, it didn't disappear. It's just not published. So
that's strange, because I thought I saw it on YouTube a while ago, like a couple of days ago. I actually saw some comments on that video on
okay,
YouTube.
so maybe it's me then, because I went looking for it and I can't find it. So I don't know. Yeah, I'll let Jared fix it. And then, because I want people also in listening to this today, if they didn't watch last week when we did the live,
No, it's there.
It is there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll put it in I can link it to the show description.
Okay, I feel better now, because I was like, Renee.
But I'm going to try to do this but you can see it here. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Good. I was stressed out this morning. Like, oh, what did I do?
No, you're fine, Renee. No, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
I do think I listed it as a special. Maybe is that why? I don't know.
No, I thought I looked under the special. Look,
or is it?
Look,
I'll double check.
This was also me, like
specials playlist, but
okay.
Yeah.
So this was me this morning trying to find it, because I wanted to make sure that we mentioned that we did that last week, so that folks know to go back and listen to that conversation, because we really we did a full deep dive on the history of the desecrations, the history of, Black cemeteries, like all the things. So a lot of that is a good setup for what we're talking about today. And so I wanted people to have access to that. And I was like, oh, I can't find this video. This is all me. So I'm glad to hear that. So
And it's in
Robert,
the show description now. So
there you go.
so
See, but
folks,
that's why Jerry got pushed the buttons, because mess around and be leaving me with stuff, and I'm like the voice coming out of nowhere because I can't figure out how to put like the little symbol on the screen. It was brutal. It was brutal, y'all. But the questions were good. So, and the information is excellent. But we put that all on Robert because he always got it. So now that we fixed that and we've clarified that I didn't jack it up too much, we will let Robert come back now, and you can talk about however you want to start to let people know where things are now, what needs to happen this week, because I know there's 2 court cases coming up, and it was kind of why we set this up to happen today, so that you had enough, we were giving people just enough time to kind of arrange their schedules to be of support if they could.
Great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about like the upcoming court cases that we have coming up next week. But I'm going to start with the history of the area and the history of the struggle, because I think that will at least set a solid foundation of the court cases, how the court cases came to be. So, yes, Renee?
I was just gonna say that's exactly what I need you to do. So thank you.
Okay, great, thanks. So the history of Moses Macedonia African Cemetery can be traced back to the enslavement period in Bethesda, Maryland. A lot of people, when they hear Montgomery County, they hear that it's very diverse. They hear, oh my God, the diversity is beautiful. But diversity, as we all know or should know, is used to whitewash a lot of serious crimes that have happened and still go on. And Montgomery County, Maryland is no exception to that. A lot of people get shocked when they find out that they were not only a bunch of slave plantations, or as we call them, death camps, but the fact that one of the largest slave rebellions took place in Montgomery County in the city of Rockville in the year 1845. A lot of people do not know that. And it's within this context that Moses Cemetery was being created, because in this area in Bethesda called River Road, you had roughly about 5 death camps. You had the Councilman Death Camp, you had the Loughborough Death Camp, you had the Posey Death Camp, the Shoemaker Death Camp, and the Ray Death Camp. Some of you all may know them by other names like plantations, but they were death camps where Africans worked from can to can't, basically from can see in the morning till I can't see at night. And the reason for that was prior to 1808, this was a huge tobacco producing region. Pretty much tobacco is a very it was a popular cash crop at the time before it was supplanted by what's now known as King Cotton. That was the crop of choice that moved the economy. In fact, around this time period, because where the slave quarters that will wind up making up the historic African American community of Graysville was founded on what was the former slave quarters of these death camps. And in addition to growing tobacco, a lot of the enslaved were rented out. In fact, there's a book I highly recommend people reading by Bob Armbeck called Slave Labor in the Capital, where he actually notes that a good chunk of the enslaved Africans that helped build Washington, D.C. actually came from River Road because of their skills in carpentry and blacksmithing and glassmaking, because their skills were just that highly regarded. After 1808, and that's significant because that's when the banning of the importation of Africans took place. So what the enslavers in Maryland and Virginia as well, they changed the economy. Instead of growing tobacco, because tobacco sucks out a lot of the nutrients in the soil, they decided we're going to start breeding enslaved to sell down to the deep south. So you start seeing the creation of they start becoming what's known as breeding farms. And it's very important that's documented that a lot of these girls, a lot of these people were buried in Moses at the time prior to 1865. These were young girls. And this is significant because per the census records we were able to find at the time, that the average lifespan of an enslaved African was around 20 to 25 years of age. So think about that. By the time you were 10 years old, you were already considered as living half of your lifespan. And when our enslaved ancestors died, they were dumped into this area that was considered swampland and were just thrown there. This is where the establishment of Moses begins, because even after, and this shows the resiliency, I want to talk about the resiliency as well of our ancestors, that even after working those long hours, planting, blacksmithing, etc., they would go to that area and they would give these, those who passed a proper burial. So fast forwarding post Civil War, you begin to see the establishment of a community called Graysville. And the reason why it got the name Graysville, because the founder was a woman named Charlotte Gray, and she had purchased 6 acres of land. And then some other folk in the community began purchasing land right next to her, which is how Graysville got established. And this is significant because by the turn of the century, this community had a school. This community had a baseball team aptly named the River Road Graysville Lions. They had the beginnings of the church. You had something called the Independent Methodist Episcopal Movement, which was later then replaced by Macedonia Baptist Church. In fact, one of the descendants that we've interviewed, Harvey Matthews, he actually mentioned that a lot of the people from River Road would actually go to the White House to build not only the bomb shelters, but also, would build the mansions in Potomac, Maryland, which is actually a good metaphor for the U.S. Like, we're good enough to build the mansions, but we're not allowed to walk in, right? There's a, and so you would figure with the resiliency and the, the quote unquote, pull yourselves up by your bootstraps pathology, you would figure, wow, this is a thriving community. We should find a way to welcome them in, right? The answer, of course, is you'd be wrong. You would think that, but you'd be wrong. And the reason why you're wrong, because Montgomery County, Maryland, began the displacement of the River Road community. And when it comes to displacement, or as I like to call it, domestic imperialism, sometimes it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in waves. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back a little bit. Around like the early 1900s, you had an African-American benevolent society called White's Tabernacle of the Ancient Order of the Sons, Daughters, Brothers, and Sisters of Moses. They actually helped purchase land in the area, where burials are already taking place, but it formally became a cemetery, and that's how Moses Cemetery got its name. It later on became known as Moses Macedonia African Cemetery because it later became associated with Macedonia Baptist Church. And so getting back to the displacement sometimes it happens in waves. And the first wave of displacement began in the mid to late 1930s, right? Where the Washington Suburban Sanitary Commission began mandating that homes now have to have indoor plumbing. And I want to be clear, I'm not against indoor plumbing. Indoor plumbing is not a displacement marker. However, when you're making, a community, especially in the midst of the Great Depression, pay higher utility bills than their white counterparts, that itself is a problem. The second wave of displacement began when they started issuing tax liens against the properties. And basically, tax liens were a way to try to find a tax or a charge on a community that basically saying, if you don't pay this, we're then going to use eminent domain to take your property, which is exactly what happened to a couple of families. And if the tax liens didn't work and these higher utility bills didn't work, then the next step was Klan violence. And a lot of people get really shocked when they hear Montgomery County, Maryland had active chapters of the Ku Klux Klan. Well, they were here, and they weren't just here, they thrived here. In fact, per some of the, not just the oral histories, but even some of the written documents that we were able to find, that the Ku Klux Klan would have open parades on River Road. They actually had open parades throughout Montgomery County, and oftentimes they often walked around with a police escort, which, as I'm sure that we all know, I'm preaching to the choir here, a lot of these police officers were also members of the Klan. And so what these communities started doing was whenever the Klan would ride, they had blackout nights where they would turn out all the lights in their homes with the hope that the Klan would pass them. And so I know I'm fast forwarding a bit. So around the mid 1950s, by the mid to late 50s, the community by and large was pushed out. And one of the last institutions there was, you had Macedonia Baptist Church and you had Moses Macedonia African Cemetery. And this is where the desecration starts to begin, because in the early to mid 60s, they started desecrating part of Moses Cemetery to build Westwood Towers. And what they did was, and what we found like from the records, is that every time they would have to stop construction every few minutes because they were coming across bones and burials, and they would put them in a sack, or they would push them downward to continue not only construction but to begin paving a parking lot. And so for about a good from the mid 60s up until the mid 2010s, that was people were parking cars on top of that parking lot. And what wound up happening in 2015, and this is transitioning to the origins of how BACC was formed, was at the time Segun and Marcia had just became pastor and first lady of Macedonia Baptist Church. And they were invited by one of the, and I know I said this to Renee at last week's show, the term master planner. I hate the term master planner, but I'm just going to use the planner in charge. Talked about like this economic development thing that the county had at the time called Thrive 2050. And so Segun, Marcia, and several members of the board of trustees, met with the planner and other members of the planning board where they talked about what we're going to do with this area. And they said, like, in this area, we're going to build a parking lot. And they say there's an alleged cemetery, but we can't find proof. Well, one of the members of that meeting who's on the board of trustees was Harvey Matthews. And Harvey Matthews grew up in that area. In fact, where the Whole Foods is on River Road, that used to be his family's farm. And he said, I don't know where you're getting your information from, but that's not an alleged cemetery. That's an actual cemetery. And I know this because me and my neighbors used to play in that cemetery because we were not allowed in the local parks. The minute he said that, the planners at the table got like disturbed and started looking back and forth because they weren't expecting a survivor of the Great Destruction on River Road. So then Marcia then, asked, well, wait a minute, if this is a cemetery, then where are the bodies? And they said, well, we don't really know where the bodies are. And then she said, well, then we have a problem. We have a crime scene on our hands. And then the discussion ended right there. And then Marcia and Segun began getting organized and started talking to members of their church, where, those who grew up on River Road said, yeah, that's a cemetery. And so when BACC first was getting started, we were, we're writing to the politicians saying, hey, there's a cemetery here. They want to develop on top of it. Can you please prevent that? And the county was kept borrowing the same term from the planning board and the Housing Opportunities Commission, saying, well, it's alleged. And so we started protesting because, we saw, okay, since we can't do that way, we're going to go do what protest, and we're going to rally our community. And then Montgomery County hired a historical consulting group called the Ottery Group to basically do a hit job on BACC. And the Ottery Group came back saying, no, this is a cemetery, and you need to work with the descendant community to properly identify its borders because of all the development that's gone on. And Montgomery County, instead of doing that, they said, okay, well, we're not going to listen to your rulings. We're going to use our own historians. Their own historians came back and said, no, that's a cemetery. The Ottery Group got it right. You need to work with the descendant community, and you need to work with the descendant community to identify what exactly do they want with the cemetery. Montgomery County was like, we're not going to do that. And so we kept protesting, building our numbers, trying to get the story out there as wide and far as possible. And I think this is a good time to, like, this is where like the court cases begin. So I'm going to start with the first court case that we have against Housing Opportunities Commission, which is taking place on Tuesday, August 26th, in the Montgomery County Circuit Court. I can stop here if there are any questions that anyone has before I get into the court cases.
I don't have any, Garrett. Okay. Yeah. So because there was a question in the chat, but it's more general, and so I want you to talk about the court cases because I want people to understand why we need people to go out and support. So yes.
Yes. Okay. So, like I mentioned, I'm going to start with our court case against HOC, the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County, Maryland. So, Housing Opportunities Commission, to provide some context, they currently own Westwood Towers and the parking lot where part of Moses Cemetery is. And back in July of 2021, we found out that the Housing Opportunities Commission was going to sell the property to Charter Ventures. Charter Ventures, which is a venture capital firm that does venture capital for housing projects. And we found out that Charter Ventures had plans for the property that they were going to try and turn into condos, and where Moses Cemetery was, in the parking lot, they were going to convert that into a dog park. I hope that people understand the symbolism of that. Building a dog park on top of a black cemetery with a plaque that basically would read, "The place where your dogs are playing and using as a bathroom is built on top of African American cemetery." So our attorneys filed a temporary injunction in court, which the judge granted. And when we went to the court back in August of 2021, the arguments that HOC's attorneys used was, that's an alleged cemetery. Macedonia Baptist Church doesn't have ties to the cemetery. The oral history of some of these descendants is wrong. Even though the cemetery is called Moses Macedonia, even though the Macedonia Baptist Church provided church records of over 100 members of the church that are buried in Moses Cemetery, even though we didn't just have oral histories, but we even had the reports from the Artery Group and the county's own historians saying that this is a cemetery. The judge looked at all the evidence and ruled in our favor. And Judge Carla Smith, she wrote a 51-page opinion, which is very brilliant. And there's three things that I wanted to note in that ruling that she said. She said that the court cannot ignore that there once was a thriving black community that was removed and had their cemetery destroyed or at minimum desecrated. The fact that she's acknowledging the role that displacement played in the desecration of Moses Cemetery, I thought was very powerful. The second thing that she wrote was that she said, it has long been established in American jurisprudence that once a piece of property is dedicated for burial, it remains a cemetery in perpetuity, whether it's in use or not. That is very powerful because she's talking about over 200-year statute that's called the right of sepulcher. The third thing, and this is towards the end of her opinion, she writes, it's the high recommendation of this court that the Housing Opportunities Commission cease and desist lest they run afoul of potential constitutional violations. In other words, she was telling HOC, knock it off, And when we got that victory, we then tried to arrange a meeting with the county executive's office, the park and planning department, and HOC to discuss, the right of return of the cemetery. What HOC did, because HOC has no act right, they filed an appeal. In their appeal, they pretty much said it was the wording of the law, because the law that we used, they said that the court may be involved in the sale of property regarding cemeteries instead of the court shall. So for them, it was so HOC filed the appeal based on the wording of the law. And so we went to the appellate court back in October of 2022, and our attorneys argued, before the Court of Appeals, and basically cited there are plenty of times within the court, including Maryland's own court, where the word may does mean the word shall. And the appellate judge, after a couple of months, ruled in favor of HOC. In their ruling, they didn't dispute the facts of the case. They acknowledged that was a cemetery. They acknowledged that BACC is the primary descendant group. They also acknowledged how the cemetery was lost due to displacement. But the ruling basically said that the rights of the developer to build affordable housing matter more than the rights of people who are buried there. So we filed an appeal immediately, and in September of 2023, the Maryland Supreme Court said they are going to hear our case, and that was significant because 88% of cases that are filed to the Maryland Supreme Court don't get heard. So the fact that we were one of the 12% to not only get heard, but to get a hearing was astounding. And then in January 2024, we went before the Maryland Supreme Court where, the judges, there were asking the attorneys for HOC about desecration. And, because they tried to say, well, desecration happened back in the 60s. It doesn't really matter now. And one of the judges asked, well, would you agree that parking cars on a cemetery, you would agree that's very disrespectful, right? And an attorney for HOC was like, yes. And it said, so you would agree that parking cars on top of a cemetery can be considered a form of desecration under Maryland law? And he said, yes, I can see that. So you agree that there's still desecration going on, it's just going on under a different format. But after the trial back in August of last year, the Maryland Supreme Court, they issued a mixed ruling, but it was overall in favor of BACC, because the Maryland Supreme Court put the question to rest, saying that it is a cemetery. They also said that, yes, that agencies and developers, while they can move forward with a sale of property containing a cemetery, they also noted that descendant communities not only have the right to bring a lawsuit, but descendant communities also have the right to seek equitable relief. And so they allowed us, so they sent the case back to the circuit court, where we were allowed to amend our complaint for equitable relief. But then HOC's attorneys tried to, and this kind of ties into, our current lawsuit, our court date coming up on Tuesday, is they tried to get the case dismissed because of what they call timeliness. And they tried that argument back in February of this year. And the judge in that case said, I'm not buying it because this is a matter of justice. But also the judge said, if people can be tried for murder 20, 30, 40 years after they committed a murder, what's to stop the charge of desecration, even after it initially happened, but which you acknowledge is still going on with people parking their cars? So this is a matter of justice. So now they're trying that same old tired argument in our upcoming court case on Tuesday, but that argument doesn't hold up, because the reason why it doesn't hold up is because they want to willingly ignore the fact that a community was displaced due to Klan violence, and who could a community go and get justice from at the time. I'm going to use an example of why that argument doesn't hold up, if I can. So I'm going to provide context. So back in June, we were protesting Montgomery County's Juneteenth. And as we're protesting, one of these ladies, and I'm a little upset because this was a Black woman who, and I think as Black people we should know better, but she was saying to us it's very inappropriate that we were protesting. And so I approached her and I said, it's never inappropriate to protest, because protesting is how we were able to get the few things we were able to get. But then she said this comment like, well, why wasn't this done when this happened 60 years ago? So I said to her, if a community was displaced due to Klan violence, and if the police and judges were affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan in some way, shape, or form, who could the community get justice from? And how could the community get justice from where they're fleeing being lynched, where they're fleeing cross burnings, where they're fleeing being shot? I'm not an attorney, and that argument has a lot of holes in it. And if I'm able to see the holes in it, I'm pretty sure that any attorney, especially with whatever evidence that they have to combat that false narrative. So that is taking place that court case is taking place August 26th, Montgomery County Circuit Court in Rockville, Maryland at 9:30 a.m. I'm highly encouraging people, especially those that are in the area, to please come out to that. Please come to our court dates on Monday and Tuesday, preferably both. But if you only attend one, just attend one of them. So that's our court case this upcoming Tuesday.
And to just to clarify, so we make sure we're clear, Tuesday's case is the HOC attempting to get the entire thing dismissed.
Yes.
Based on timeliness. So
yes.
You all are appearing before the court to argue that you can't use timeliness as an excuse because the entire population was being displaced at the time that the desecration began. And because the desecration continues, timeliness is not a factor for the case, correct?
That is absolutely correct. And I also want to add, I also want to add something else too. This isn't the first time we've seen like the quote unquote timeliness doctrine used. In fact, it's actually been used against indigenous communities, when they've been trying to stop their desecration of their burial grounds. And that hasn't held up in other courts either across the country, especially because if you're acknowledging that it's still going on and you're acknowledging how, and I know things are a little bit different with a lot of indigenous communities because, a lot of the indigenous communities have treaties that have been continually violated, but the principle, however, still applies, especially if it's still ongoing, So yes, you're absolutely correct on that.
All right. So, okay. So Monday's a whole different. And
yes.
Can I just say, by the way, that these are back to back is like wild in my brain. But so Monday's case is what?
Okay, so Monday's case is against 1784 Capital Holdings. And so to provide some context, so to go back to 2020, remember, this is the height of the beginnings of the COVID pandemic, that while we were sitting in our homes around the months of April and May, we found out that Montgomery County issued a permit that allowed 1784 Capital Holdings to begin construction on parcel, what's known as parcel 242. And the reason why that's problematic is because in addition to the oral histories, we have documentation that was used as a burial ground both during and even after, a little bit after the enslavement period. In fact, where 242 is, we call that Old Moses. And it's very vital to know that because that used to be swampland. And so we went out and protested throughout the summer of 2020, in addition, tying the issues of police terrorism with desecration of Black cemeteries. And we were protesting as they were beginning construction, as they started digging into the ground. And we were taking photos that they were finding tombstones, they were finding coffin lids, and they were finding bones. And it's very important to note that the significance of that, because these bones, these bones are like part of like some of the harder evidence. Like if you don't want to believe that these are coffin lids, and if you don't want to believe these are tombstones, then you need to look at the bones. But they never really studied the bones. In fact, they were putting bones in a bag and labeling them as animal bones. Like these are chicken bones, rat bones, pig bones. But the saving grace, a blessing in disguise, was that they sent the bones to be tested at Towson University to this professor at Towson by the name of Dana Coleman, who also has a specialty in identifying whether or not bones are animal or the human bones. And she said that further testing needs to be done because I can't rule out the bones as being not human, And instead of actually further testing being done, testing wasn't done in 2020. Instead, what they did was that they took the bones and took them to a warehouse in Gainesville, Virginia. And mind you, we as the descendant community, we weren't even aware. All they were doing during that time period with the county executive, they're just saying that's not a cemetery. That's not a cemetery. These people are being delusional. And so what we had to do, was like, again, like educating the community, the history of the area, as well as the fact that you can't really judge African-American cemeteries by European standards. And the reason for that is because, one, in a lot of historic African-American enclaves that are scattered throughout the U.S., but especially Montgomery County, you have what's called in archaeological language as community burial property. That basically means that when you kick the bucket, that this is the area that you're going to be buried in. And that's significant because I'm going to use this as an example. Let's say you're at a predominantly white church and they have a cemetery. The borders are very identifiable, bodies are usually going to be buried within this range. But when you contrast that with African American cemeteries, African American or African burial grounds in the U.S., especially once you do like ground penetrating radar and you actually delineate the area, you may find there are bodies buried within this radius. So you can't often judge that because, like I said, because this was community burial property. And so, we, were able to file a lawsuit against 1784 Holdings. And the reason why it's been a little bit difficult is because, for a while, our attorneys at the time were trying to figure out, well, how do we file a lawsuit against 1784? And, they basically, tried to, they couldn't find anything at first. But then when they found out about how the bones were very much cross state lines and there wasn't really a lot of testing done, nor we were notified, that's when we were able to do some of the following. We were able to file a lawsuit based on the fact that, they had trafficked bones interstate, which violated some potential interstate laws. They also had basically not like, I think there's like a law. There's a law that basically said that the person that they hired wasn't an expert in bioarchaeology or forensic archaeology, because one of the consultants they hired has a background in historical archaeology, but not bio or forensic archaeology. And that's important because when you're dealing with cemeteries, you also got to test the soil for what's called biomass. In a quick way, and again, let me just say this, I'm not a forensic scientist, but I do remember taking basic science that a key sign of biomass is seeing how dark the soil is. And you need to test that soil for DNA. That can tell you, who was buried here, how long ago did they die. And that is very, very vital because that can also tell you about what was going on at the time, like what was the diet, etc. That wasn't done. And now we just recently found out that the 1784 had some testing done, and in their own tests, and I gotta be very careful here, but the tests allegedly came back that there was human DNA found in the samples tested, allegedly, potentially. And so basically to us, it's like, that's not surprising considering the fact that this was a burial ground, but also the fact that pretty much 1784 committed a crime. You took part in desecration. Not only that, you allegedly committed a crime, you allegedly committed desecration, and the fact that you typically went around ignoring and insulting BACC. And so the court case that's come up on Monday is they're trying to get parts of the case dismissed. That's what the court case is going on Monday against 1784 Holdings. They're trying to get some parts of our case dismissed. So what we're asking people to do is that we're asking people, like I said earlier, to please come and help us pack the courthouse on both dates. It's going to be held in the same courtroom, circuit court. I gotta double check. One's going to be held in the North Tower. The other's going to be held in the South Tower. And we're asking people to not only pack the courtroom, but after the hearings, we're going to have press conferences immediately afterwards. So we're asking people to please come out and show out if you live in the DMV area.
Thank you. It's too bad your life about to reset, Jared. Is there somebody we can send out there? Can we send somebody out there to be at the press conference at least? I'm gonna have to think on this one.
It's a good question.
I don't live close enough, so I definitely can't do it. But I wonder if there's someone else who can go out and give us the update and be present for the press conference after each of those cases, because I'm curious. So I have a couple of questions. Jared, do you have questions? Because I have a couple of questions.
No, I'm good. Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So the property that the plot that 1784 Holdings is attempting to build on, is the thought that this is an extension of Moses Cemetery because they're community burial sites, or is it a whole separate burial site?
So it's not, well, so we don't consider it a separate burial site. And the reason why we say that is because where the area is, it's part of the community burial property. In fact, I think I showed this in an earlier show, but when you look at the map of the areas that make up most cemeteries are literally right next to each other: 242, 177, and 175. They're all literally like lined up next to each other. So that's all considered like one part of the burial ground. The only minor difference is that where 175 and 177 is, that's where the African Benevolent Society had formerly purchased that area, which transformed the burial ground to a cemetery, and that's the area that we like to call New Moses. But it's all part of the community burial property because of where it was located.
Understood. Now, New Moses still exists as a cemetery and a burial site, or no?
So that part, so part of it is part of it's the parking lot for Westwood Towers that's currently
Oh
under
Lord.
control of
Hmm.
HOC, the
Hmm.
Housing Opportunities Commission. 177 is currently grassland, and that's under the control of Parks and Planning, the Parks and Planning department of the Planning Board. And there's an interesting history of 177. If I can go into that.
Yes,
So
please, please.
so back in 2018, the private developer that actually had that property was Regency. You may have seen their name, like they actually helped develop a couple shopping mall outlets. Regency actually approached us and said, listen, we recognize this is a cemetery, and they were going to transfer the land back to us. So our attorneys were meeting with their attorneys, and we were, about to sign paperwork which would transfer 177 back to BACC and Macedonia Baptist Church. Well, on the day of the meeting, they pretty much said, "Oh, we can't transfer the land to you," and then the meeting was over. We then found out that the Parks and Planning got involved and said, "No, you can't transfer it to BACC or the Macedonia Baptist Church," and they took over ownership of 177. And Parks and Planning is another county agency that we have had to do battle, that we had to do war against, because basically, and I'm just going to, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but planning boards are nothing more than rubber stamps for developer-led projects. And the Parks and Planning, refused to meet with us, despite the fact that we showed them documents saying, listen, they were about to transfer it to us. And then when we did get a meeting, this was around 2023 with the relatively new head of the planning board. And basically at the meeting, we basically said, look, we wouldn't even be in the situation if you all had just minded the business that paid y'all. And basically their response was, well, we're not going to return the land to you because it's part of our Greenway project that we have for the area. And again, we're not against, we're actually pro-environmentalists, but we're just saying you don't have to do all that at the expense of a Black cemetery.
Is there Robert, you just be sending me down some paths. All right, let me put a pin in the Greenway project because I'm trying. I need more. I need more. I need to understand more on that. But so I don't know how many people know, but y'all know how I get. So the 1784 Holdings Company is a self-storage company. So just so people are clear, that one group built a parking lot and another group wants to build a storage facility on top of Bones. That's just
yes. And you know what the jacked up thing is? In that area, there's already 3 storage units. Why on earth are you building a 4th one? And the reason why I say that is because, for those who don't know anything about Montgomery County, Maryland, Bethesda is one of the wealthiest areas in Montgomery County. And it's like basically what they want to do, because they've already started building some condos in this area, and some of the condos are going for as little as $1 million. So basically, what we're seeing here is that we're seeing another wave of displacement going on, because their idea is we're going to build the storage unit because some of these condos, wealthy townhomes, are very small, so people can actually go to this new storage unit and build it and actually store their stuff. But here's the issue though. When you look at when you go to their website and you look at their portfolio and you see an image of how the storage unit that they're currently trying to build looks like if completed, it doesn't look like your typical storage unit. To me, it looks like, and this is a theory that we have. The theory that we have is that it starts off as a self-storage unit, but then they're going to try and convert it to some.
Right, it turns into some other thing.
Yeah, like some sort of mixed use, mixed residential development, and that's where like another cause of concern that we have.
This is wild. And I know it crashes you, Jared, but I dropped it in the chat so that you could get a chuckle as to about looking at that about page, the about us page for 1784. It just explains so much about who this company is and what why they don't care about the black bodies buried underneath the land that they're trying to build a storage unit on top of, because that's what they do. I just so Monday is also a dismissal case.
Yeah, it's a dismissal case, but it's not. But it's
not a full dismissal case.
Yeah, it's not a full. Yeah, exactly. It's not a full dismissal case. They're trying to dismiss major parts of major parts of our lawsuit. But basically, and I have cautious confidence. And the reason why I say I have cautious confidence is because the evidence that we have is strong. We have the documentation, we have the history, we have the oral history. We even have some other examiners who examined the photos we took in 2020 that showed that these were indeed coffin lids and tombstones that we were finding at the time. And we also were able to save some of the funerary items, like some of the glass bottles. We were able to save some of the soil, including a couple of seashells, and that's significant because amongst African American cemeteries, there was the connection with the sea, with the water. It was considered sacred. So,
yeah, that's wild. And of course, poor Jared tried to pull up the link and it crashed him, so he'll be back in a minute. So I think I'm clear on where the cases are right now. And hopefully folks can get out there and and kind of let be of support, have actual bodies in the building as these cases are going, so that they see that there's some support for the community. I don't know what you have going on next week, but should we not be able to find somebody who can be there for the actual press conferences, maybe we can try and pull you in for a quick 30 minutes to talk about what the result was of the two cases, so that we can update folks on what's happening.
Sure, absolutely. Consider me Monday and Tuesday the unofficial reporter for Black Liberation Media.
That would be dope. So you mentioned the Greenway project, and just because you mentioned it, can you talk about what that project is about?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Sure. So the Greenway project that they have for the area is that basically it's a design, environmental. Okay. It's basically it's this environmental project to try to help, create what's called green space. And again, I just want to say I'm not against green space. And especially as someone who's been an activist organizer for a long time, I got my start in the environmental space. I'm not against green space, but what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to create this green space, like walkable and bikeable paths. But the issue that we have though is the fact that you're trying to use build this Greenway project, and you're trying to do it on like, you know, and also part of the Greenway project is helping like create the help reestablish the Willett Branch stream. And you know, the Willett Branch stream, you know, was built next to Moses, you know, is part, you know, was built in between Moses Macedonia Cemetery, but yet the Black working class community there, and we know this again because of the history, we never poisoned the environment. We were able to keep our cemetery clean and pristine and not violate any of the green space that was there at the time. But our thing is, you don't have to do all of that at the expense of a cemetery, especially when the only reason why you got 177, which is considered a key part of the Greenway project, is because the Parks and Planning ran interference when the developer at that time, Regency, was going to transfer 177 back to BACC and Macedonia Baptist Church.
So was that eminent domain that they used? Did they just say like, you can't give it to them and we're taking this plot? Or was there a payment? Was it like, I'm still trying to understand how they stepped in and just like, it just.
So what we were able to find out that they didn't use eminent domain. They basically, I gotta go back over the documents, but I think that there was a bit of I think it's called like what they call a land swap. Basically, you know, we're going to swap this if you give us this. That's basically like the best way for me to describe it. So it wasn't eminent domain. We're just going to take it over, and that's the end of it. You know, they pretty much was like a land exchange. But that's very important to not, because like, you know, this isn't just the issue of desecration. This is the issue of land justice. You know, as Malcolm once said, you know, land is justice, land is power.
Right. And do you know what they swapped it for?
That I am not. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I have no idea what, you know, which land within Montgomery County, that they swapped it for. That I'm not familiar.
That's interesting, because and it's also interesting to me that they don't see putting in pathways as another version of desecration. Like, it's one thing. There's one thing if you're just going to leave the land, right? Like, leave it, let it be grass, whatever. But if you're going to start trying to turn it into like these usable park spaces, as they always, you know, that all also requires like, you know, you're interfering with the space as it is naturally. Like, if you're putting in a path, you have to dig up the ground to put in a path. It's not like, you know, it's still desecration. So I'm these people are just...
Exactly. And that's something that we've brought up too. It's like, so like building this Greenway project means that like the desecration of 177 is just going to continue, it's going to pick up again, all in the name of building building this Greenway project. And again, not against green spaces, but you don't have to build, you don't have to build on top of a cemetery to do it. In fact, other places, when they were creating green spaces that involved cemeteries, they were able to find ways to leave cemeteries alone, even with the expansion of green spaces. So, like, case in point, in Alexandria, Virginia, they were able to find a way. Okay, there's a historic African American cemetery. They were able to find a way to build a green space without desecrating or disturbing the cemetery. Even in Richmond, Virginia, you know, like where they built a memorial to the Shako, the Shako African cemetery, they were able to find ways to build green spaces around that. And I'm like, you mean to tell me, like in Richmond, which was at one point the capital of the Confederacy, they've been able to figure out ways to do this, and here we are in Montgomery County, Maryland, and y'all acting as if like your hands are tied,
Right?
like,
Which we all know is nonsense. This is just whatever thing they have coming. They're trying to make sure that they have possession of the land. So that actually reminded me of a question that I did not ask, which you said that they moved bones to Gainesville, Virginia. Do you know any information about why they chose that? Where exactly in Gainesville? What is
okay, yeah,
what that's about?
yeah, absolutely. So, to provide some context, so when 1784 began digging up parcel 242, they had hired this archaeological firm called Thunderbird Archaeology, and Thunderbird Archaeology was the one that was supposed to be on site doing tests, examining samples, etc. And the warehouse in Gainesville, Virginia, is where they're headquartered at. So that's why they took the bones, because that's to Gainesville, because that was their warehouse. So
Okay, so they actually are housing the bones at one of their own warehouses somewhere.
Matter of fact,
wild.
like last Saturday, we did a car caravan to Gainesville, Virginia, where we were hosted by our comrades of the Coalition to Save Thoroughfare and Friends of Dumfries Cemetery, where we held a prayer vigil outside of their warehouse where they're holding the bones. We had a prayer vigil. We were where we had prayers done in Yoruba. We had indigenous. We had our indigenous comrades, United Tribes of the Shenandoah. They, provided the indigenous perspective of honoring the ancestors, as well as a song in, I think, the language of the Pamunkey people. And we also had African dance done by Martha Peterson. So we went there to basically show solidarity with the thoroughfare community, but also to honor our ancestors, let them know we have not forgotten about them at all. So, and also in a way, I think we went down there to let them know, like, you think that you're safe from us in Gainesville, Virginia, think again,
Right. And I think it's kind of important for people to understand. Leah mentioned it in the chat, and as you started talking about them sending the bones, the first thing I thought about is how UPenn is still like holding the children's bones hostage from the MOVE bombing, right? And so
yeah, exactly.
Right. And so that's what I was just thinking of. Is it down there? Is it at like some kind of small school or something? I was trying to think like what's in Gainesville, Virginia, and I can't think of anything. But to know that they're just sitting in a storage unit is actually more gross. Like,
that's Florida University, right? Gainesville?
No, it's Gainesville, Virginia.
Oh, Virginia. My bad.
Yeah,
you're fine.
I got lost in. I got so rage baited by my computer that I lost track of where we were. My bad.
And I'm telling y'all, that was my fault, because Jared definitely saw the link and definitely opened it up and was like, "Oh, I gotta show this," and then crashed. My bad.
Because it's the liliest of folks that are involved in holding up all of this right. In the assaults, in the abuse. It is just the super whitest of folks. That was like, I gotta try it.
There's like not one splash of color on that entire body.
Not a drip drop of melanin anywhere. Yeah, I don't even think anybody had brown eyes in that joint. That joint was
brutal.
Yeah,
it's brutal. So, all right. So this is all. So this is pretty clear to me what's happening, and like on the light side of this, I'm like, did people not watch like what was that movie where the bodies started like just coming out the ground because they built a housing development on top of an old great. What movie was that? With the TV, the
Poltergeist.
Remember at the end, all the bodies started coming up out the ground. So, I mean,
yeah,
I can't. I don't even understand why people would want to put something on top of someone else's remains like that. I just
Oh,
don't.
that part. I mean, I thought you were going to say something else. To me, this makes this is logical. This is part of the logical continuation of the abuses. I thought you were going to say, why would people want to live in a property they knew was put there? And I
But
don't
you
know
know,
to what
I
extent
don't
people
always
even
know
would
that
know.
people
Yeah,
know,
that's what I was going to say. I don't even
right?
think. Yeah.
Like I
So
don't know
I
that people
definitely would
know.
not, because they don't even want to tell you if you're buying like people try to hide if a homicide took place in a home. That like that becomes an issue. People don't want to, they don't want that vibe. And I don't, I certainly would not want to, if somebody said, oh, this is your potential new home. And by the way, it's on top of a destroy any cemetery, never mind an African burial or African descended population. Be like, I would absolutely not want to do it. I don't want to even see. I wouldn't even want to see one, much less live on top of one.
Right.
So,
to,
but
to
yeah,
what yeah,
I
so
don't
I'm
think they're
sorry, I
no.
didn't mean to cut you off,
No,
brother
you're good.
Jared.
You're good. You're good. You're
So,
good. Please.
so so from my observation, as to why not only would people want to develop on top of a cemetery, but also why some folk would want to live on top of one. My observations can be boiled down to 3 points. One is that there is, to me, there's a sickness in spiritual sickness, and this is that people feel like they want to like tempt. And what I mean by that is that they want to see if the stories are true. If I live in a house that's buried on top of a cemetery, it's going to be, am I going to be dealing with like these things I grow up seeing in movies? And I'm kind of like, there's movies and then there's reality. Movies, there's a lot of special effects, but when it comes to reality, however, and I'm a person that believes that spirit is real, that ancestors find a way of messing with you, in your house. Like, if like, especially if the way that the cemetery was, when the cemetery is destroyed, there's a way that like, spirit will come after you. All right. And my thing is like, and the borrow quote from the movie Sinners, that, back in May, you keep dancing with the devil, eventually one day he's going to follow you home. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and this kind of boils down more so in the secular, is that there's like this greed component, right? Is that the concept of greed that we have here in the United States and how it's celebrated in this culture, like with the movie Wall Street, where the phrase greed is good. Well, some folks is like, I don't care that this house is built on top of a cemetery. I'm trying to make a quick buck. I want to see how much money I can make from it. And if I want to, and I want to see how much money I want to make from it. Doesn't matter what happens after the fact. I want to get mine. Forget everyone else. But the problem is, though, is that ignores the collective responsibility that we have. Because if you don't care about the dead, then I know you don't care about the living. And this ties into the third point. And this is part of fascism. Part of fascism, and it goes back to the art of war, is to wipe out your enemy, you have to make it seem as if they don't exist. So one of the ways that I wipe away your existence, in addition to like removing you out the textbooks and removing you from the school curriculum, is I remove any physical trace. So if you had a place of worship, that's eliminated. You have a cemetery, a burial ground, I'm going to eliminate it. So that's just been my observation, not just like within the immediate struggle here, but also talking and working with other descendant groups across the country. That's a very common theme.
Yeah. And also
And,
just thinking like our bodies don't really matter as like living, breathing humans walking around on the street, like in general. So I don't know why I would think anybody would care about the bodies that have been underground for 300-400 years. They don't care about the living bodies now. So there's
the fact
also
that,
that.
yeah, in fact, one of the things that you hear Marsha talk about is that it goes back to that Dred Scott decision, and that is, are Black people considered human? And remember, like, there's the Dred Scott decision that Black people, that Chief Roger Taney said that blacks have no rights which a white person is bound to respect. And that even includes, unfortunately, the right to rest in peace. Interestingly enough, however, desecration per the UN and international law is not only considered a hate crime, it's considered an act of war and an act of genocide. And so basically, Montgomery County, whether they want to admit it openly or not, are engaging in an act of war and an act of genocide. They've pretty much declared war on the black community here in Montgomery County.
That's wild.
Mm-hmm.
Are you deep in thought there, Jared?
No, I was, well, every time I hear it brought up, I go back to the whole thing about Justice Taney and his relationship, I think by marriage, to Francis Scott Key, and then the third verse of the national anthem being a pro-slavery, violent threat. And that was the circle I was starting to go in. And then it was also reminding me that I live in Howard County, Maryland, which is named, and I was just looking it back up, John Edgar Eager Howard. I couldn't remember his full name. But he was an owner of enslaved Africans too. So like it's like the whole place, and they just built this thing, Blandair Park, not far from my house. And then they have a little plaque in the middle of it that says, this used to be a plantation. And I was like, I don't even feel, you talk about cemetery, I didn't even feel right standing there on that. I was like, this is sacred ground. You built a little park on this. The park is fly. I will give them that. But I was like, this is, so yeah, this whole state, which gets a lot of rebranding as a fully blue Democratic state, with Howard County supposedly with some of the best schools in the country, and Montgomery County with some of the per capita income, greatness and all that kind of stuff, and all the wealth in the region and all that kind of stuff. But this is as people have been saying in the chat, this place is sinister. It's diabolical.
It is. And the thing that people, and I tell this to people all the time, and this is like the organizer, organizing across the state, is that you have two Howard counties. I always say you have Howard County and then there's Hoco. Just like I say, you have Montgomery County and then there's Moco. Montgomery County, the wealthy areas are places like the Bethesdas, the Potomacs, the Kensingtons, even like some places like, Hampshire and Fairland Estates. But Moco are places like the Briggs Cheneys, the White Oaks, places that are typically working class areas. Just like, and I'm pretty sure this about Howard County, everyone loves hyping up Columbia, as Columbia as its centerpiece. But then there's other parts of Howard County where it's kind of like, yeah, this is not this is not it. You know what I'm saying? So basically, I say all
Columbia
that,
is small. Like it's relatively, like it's 100,000, 150,000 people. And then, so, and it is not cracked up. Yeah. It is not what it's cracked up to be. But the rest, even the county, never mind the state, is, to your point, is and as I was informed not too long ago, like they're even making it harder, despite the sliding scale of conditions as you move to other parts of the county. They are also reducing affordable housing in Howard County.
Exactly.
So it's yeah,
exactly. And this whole myth of being a blue state, and this is like for folks who aren't aware about Maryland politics, is that Democrats here, and this includes Virginia as well, the Democrats in Maryland and Virginia are called Tidewater Democrats. Tidewater Democrats is just another term for just your good old fashioned centrists. They're they pretty much Dixiecrats, exactly, like Dixiecrats. And that's, in case in point, that's why people, I remember this was all over the news when Governor Wes Moore vetoed reparations, and people wanted to act all shocked. And I'm like, tell me you don't live in Maryland without telling me you don't live in Maryland. This is literally anyone who's takes part in the organizing space could see that he was going to veto it over a mile away, and his veto letter I thought was full of BS. Because
but brother Robert, the letter, I'm sorry, the letter, your point is hilarious. The letter, he reminds us we got to be fair, brother Robert. We don't want to misinform the people, because the good Governor Moore told us we don't need reparations. He's already doing it. His work is already providing all that a reparations bill would be meant to give.
I love Jared. You know, I love how you just had the fallout laughing at the end, because his letter,
I couldn't even get through it. I mean, it really was comical that he was trying to. You're already free. What you need reparations for?
Because the thing that he was talking about, his programs were addressing future harms, which I find ironic, because he literally signed into law a bill like in 2020, like, yeah, it was 2023. No, not 23, it was 2024. Like, you know, he signed into law a bill that would allow juveniles as young as 10 to be tried as adults, you know, and it's going to target, like, you know, Black youth, you know. But the thing is, reparations addresses past harms, and those past harms are things that currently influence us to this very day. Like in his letter, he talks about we're going to be building affordable housing, and yet where's the affordable housing being built? Or how many units are going to be available, you know?
He can't. I mean, they haven't even fixed all the stuff just in Baltimore. They
Exactly.
keep talking about building affordable housing. You still have all of these boarded up homes in Baltimore, just in Baltimore, that could be.
Mhm.
And that's always been the argument whenever people start talking about building affordable housing. I always question, why are we taking away more space to create things that you could create in space? Like, there's already so many empty apartments, empty buildings, empty. Like, why aren't we utilizing those spaces? Because I know, like in New York, if I remember correctly, you could provide housing for every single houseless person plus, with the amount of empty apartments that already exist in New York. So I'm never clear on, like, why are we making this effort with this whole, like, you know, we're gonna build affordable housing. How about you just tell people they can't profit off of an empty building, or they can't hold an empty building hostage in order to force whatever thing that they're trying to force wherever they hold that property? Like, how about we do that?
Exactly. And within the context of Moses Cemetery, you know, we've actually protested events where Governor Morris had fundraisers, and he's been having fundraisers at these millionaires' homes. And it's very telling, the fact that you're having a fundraiser at these millionaires' homes where, like, the quote unquote cheap tickets to get in are like $600. All right, $600 for like, in this economy, no. But then, you know, when we were protesting, you know, you want to act as if, like, you know, you're not hearing us. And this is ties into another thing, you know, how a lot of these politicians, especially some of these a lot of your so-called Black politicians here, you know, have been silent in the face of this issue. You know, I know that, people want to get shocked when they hear that the Legislative Black Caucus of Maryland is the largest Black caucus throughout the entire country, and yet a lot of them side with developers. A lot of them have been backed by developers, and that's why it's no surprising that they've either been hostile or they've been dead silent. And I remember something that a mentor of mine used to say. He used to say that the DC area Negro is a very unique species. And he said they're a unique species because they're the epitome of the house Negro, you know. And in my experience, that, and especially, like, you know, fighting for, like, land justice and being part of the grassroots, that becomes more and more apparent every single day.
So we have a couple of questions in the chat.
Sure,
were you about to go to those, Jared?
Yes, but indirectly, in reverse order, just because I dropped in answer to one of Chidi Macha's questions. Yes, Robert did say correctly that Westmore said juveniles as young as 10 can be tried as adults, and I dropped a link in the chat where you can see a story about that.
Now I'm trying not to get my states confused, because New Jersey is also a hot mess with regard to juvenile quote unquote justice. I gotta start calling it what Alec Karakatsanis calls it, which is the punishment bureaucracy, which I feel like is a way better term for what it is, because it's definitely not justice. But so in New Jersey, they're attempting to add to the amount of crimes that automatically get charged as adults. Now, I think Maryland is either first or second on the list of how many crimes for which a non-adult can be charged as an adult automatically. In New Jersey, a 14-year-old can opt. Yes, I said opt. A 14-year-old can opt to be charged as an adult for any number of crimes, because they're convinced by the prosecution that this could result in like less time and all these things. Like it's wild. Like it's wild in New Jersey. Like how this. But I can't.
I don't know what the problem is though. I was making great decisions at 14. I don't know. Like I was, so I don't know what the issue is,
Yeah, well, so to go back to what you were saying, Renee, about Maryland was number one up until a year ago in terms of incarceration of Black youths between the ages of 18 and 25. We are now, I think, second place behind Mississippi. And I let folk know, especially in the school to prison, who are advocating to end school to prison pipeline, like, do we really want to be up there with Mississippi? But the long and short of it is, and this is something that goes back to what I was saying with the history of Maryland. Maryland is part of the South, and they set the tone for the rest of the South. It wasn't even just that fact, you couldn't assemble in large groups if you were Black. Other states saw there like, wow, they're hitting, bam. You couldn't play the drum because it was alleged that was a signal for rebellion. Other southern states, Mississippi included, saw that and were like, yeah, let's take that, let's borrow from that, So the long and short of it is that if you're going to be serious about what's going on and how to change it, you have to study the history of the place you live in. And if you're organizing in Howard County, you got to know the history of Howard County. If you're organizing in Paterson, New Jersey, you got to know the history of Paterson, New Jersey, because that gives you, this is the battleground. Now let's find the weak points,
Right. So just very quickly, so we got a shout out. Lasan Dupree said we have Save Moses Cemetery signs down here in Piney Branch, East Silver Spring. So that's Turnpike, right? Is that Turnpike? What's that?
Tacoma Park. That's Tacoma Park. So, so Tacoma Park is it's like a small city within Montgomery County. We actually developed a wonderful partnership with the Tacoma Park Co-op, where in addition to like them selling like most cemetery signs and our T-shirts, when we have protests, they also contribute snacks to our protests and rallies. So that's part of building. And I want to this is where I want to have a more positive is this is a liberation movement. In fact, one of the things that a news article about us in Black Public Media noted said what gives BACC an advantage is that we operate like a guerrilla resistance movement. We operate like a movement in the bush. We're able to quickly come together for Moses, and how we're able to build and coalesce with a lot of groups in Montgomery County, so that's part of the reason why we've been able to have the community engagement that we have, as to how we move and operate.
That's dope. And then we also have another question in the chat, which is James wants to know, can he speak to hidden grave sites? White folks out here still know where unmarked grave sites are and buying them and covering them up.
Oh yeah, sure. I can speak on that. So I I'll start off by saying, are they really hidden, or are they really hidden, or are they really, out there, but how many people know about them? And I say that because, um, if one were to go through archives, like, your local, your state archives, and I know each state is different, but depending on where you live, you could actually find like a small database of cemeteries and burial grounds. It then becomes a matter of getting directions to them. And if you find directions, oftentimes what's considered hidden has been, like, it's called hidden because they've either been neglected, and when a cemetery is neglected, you have a lot of overgrowth. So then now you're trying to dig and trying to see, okay, where's a tombstone, where's a burial marker. In some cases, when it comes, especially when it comes to, like folk like us, we find cemeteries so we can try to properly memorialize them, keep them clean. And to, I think his name was James's point, some will find them, go through the records, go through the research, so they can purchase them, and purchase them for, I'm going to try to find a nice way to put it, some interesting purposes. Some of these folks will buy cemeteries so they could host parties in them, like Halloween bashes. And I'm kind of like, no, it's one thing if you want to do a cemetery tour during Halloween. I mean, it's a tour. As long as there's historical stuff, I'll let it slide. But if you're trying to throw a party, don't you think about the damages you can do to the tombstones or other burial markers? What about the trash? Who's going to be there to pick the trash up? Are you going to pick up the trash, or are you just going to, or just going to make that a quote unquote makeshift dump yard? And it's unfortunate that I've heard some stories, like case in point, one of our comrades, who's Lisa Fager, and Jared, I know who she is, of the Black Georgetown Foundation. There have been times where she's had to videotape and chase out people who tried to use the Mount Zion All-Female Band Society cemeteries as party grounds, or using it as a dog park. She's literally have had to chase folk out of that, and then they want to act as if they discovered it, even though, in Lisa's case, she had been doing this research for years. She's been working with the local community for years, working with local historians for years. It's not that the fact that it's hidden, it's just that you're just discovered because it's new to you. It's not new to the communities that have been around there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, salute to Lisa. Known her for a long time, and learned a lot about the music industry in particular from her and her buddy Paul Porter. So yeah, and I do know she's been doing this work for a long, long time. So yeah, salute to her.
So this was a lot, as usual. And Robert is a wealth of information, as usual. And so I really, I appreciate it. I'm gonna drop. Hold on, because you did put some information for folks.
Yeah, I put for people, if they want to follow us online, I put the IG and Twitter is at Beth, which is BETH Cemetery. On Facebook, it's Save Bethesda African Cemetery. And if you want to, follow me on IG, I'm going to put my IG information there and my Twitter information. Just give me
and
one
the link
second.
to their work is in the show description, folks, along with the link to the video presentation that Robert did the other day and the discussion that was had the other day with Renee. So please avail yourself of that as well. And I'll drop.
Oh, you dropped. Okay, you got it.
Yeah, I think I can without
Oh,
crashing. I think I can do this much.
Yeah, and also let me also put the website that we have in the chat. Give me 1 minute.
It's in the show description. If folks want to get it,
we already did. Oh, okay, great,
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
Thank you, perfect. Thank you so much.
And I appreciate that website. You all do a good job of keeping folks updated and what's coming up next and what's what. It's a really good source of information. So I do I do recommend that folks take some time to take a look at the site and to see what information is available, because there's a lot there.
Yeah, I was just reading this comment from Sayla about no shade on dog owners, but these makeshift dog parks and runs are becoming a problem for many community members, especially in New York City. Yeah, I
Agreed.
yeah, they built a dog park out here, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it. I didn't like it, and I didn't like how it was being run, and I didn't like the setup, and I didn't like that the fees we all pay out here don't automatically cover entrance, and had a little. And I didn't like the way that the person that the whatchamacallit was talking to me that day. I didn't like any of that. And then they built this other one, this BACC Social, that was supposed to be the hot new, and it never even opened. It's just sitting there, not far from Columbia Mall, just sitting there, taking up space. And but again, to all the points raised, with all that could be done with resources, and I love my dog, but I feel like we don't need another set of institutions specifically for dogs when so many people have so little. But anyway, that was sort of a non sequitur. Sorry for that.
But I agree. Yeah, but no worries. Like the dog parks, I happen to agree with the comment that, and I love dogs too. Don't get me wrong, but like, why do you feel you put a dog park when there could be housing here, or there could be, you'd be using that money to help fund schools. You could be doing that for so freaking much for other, I think, more beneficial purposes.
Just open space. Like you put a fence around open space and called it private property again. It was like the super microcosmic colonial experience.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 5 minutes ago, that was just space. And now you put a little fence. And that's what I was saying to the woman. Like you show up, put a fence around it and tell me I can't get in there.
Yeah, exactly. I remember
that whole. I'm just sorry, but just real quick, because this is wild to me. Like, wait a minute. Hey. In Williamsburg, they removed children's playgrounds for that is wild to me.
Now, in where we used to live down the street, they took the playground out from behind our townhouse, and I went and raised a fuss about it. And they initially said it was because they were going to replace it with something better. And of course they never did. And so I was like, and of course that street was mostly black and brown, of various browns, so to speak. And they were like, no. And it just, and then like I said, but 5 minutes later, there's a dog park, there's this BACC Social that they at least built. And I'm like, hold up. So my kids aged out of it, but other people's kids can't get up on this. There's no jungle gym and anything right out back anymore. And but everybody has special places for their dogs and their bikes, which is I'm a little irritated at that too. So
and I also have this question, like, you paying to get into the dog
park? That's what I said. So I said, not to get into a whole thing about Colombia and get into like first world complaints, but it's like we already pay, home ownership fees, community association fees. It's like, and then you're gonna put up another private, as she was quick to tell me, private. It reads, like Columbia Dog Park, but it's private property. And tell me I got to pay another $30 to get in there. And then, as I told her, I said, you might say you landscaped a little bit, but you essentially just put a fence over what was a field yesterday. And now you're telling me, and just the smug attitude.
This is
like,
this is a general problem. Like I know for some people this may seem like we're on like a tangent, but we're not, because this is one of the things that they're trying to do with the gravesite that BACC is fighting against. And so this all comes back to this like literal disregard for one, public spaces, for two, leaving spaces as they occur naturally or have been naturally, and three, capitalizing on spaces that should be open for anybody to use for any reason, dropping a fence in and telling somebody that the same place that they could go walk for free 2 weeks ago, now you have to pay somebody to go walk into that space. And that is wild to me.
And they stand there with an attitude. After the rules and the laws about maybe doggy bags and stuff like that, which I'm for, pick up the poop, all that kind of stuff, all of that. I'm a good citizen. I'm with all of that. After that, it should be, we need open space for humans and people, and we need housing for people. And, for the most part, I think, especially, for the most part, our dogs and pets are very well cared for. They're good. They're good. They don't need that. They're good. And again, the logic though is that private white wealth is primary. So whether we're talking about dog parks, cemeteries, whatever, that's the end point. And it just inspires very YouTube inappropriate responses and feelings. Like yeah. It just, my little, icing on this cake of horrors that Robert has been detailing for the last 90 minutes is all I'm adding here. I'm just added a little bit of garnish to this meal, and with the dog park stuff. But I think there's a continuum here,
it's all connected. It's all connected because, like you said, it goes back not only to the domestic imperialism, it goes back to the issue of land justice, land theft. It goes back into the fact that, goes back to like that superimposition, in terms of, like you said, what was once a field that you could walk through, bike through, just relax after a long day's work, all because someone puts a fence up on it. And now all of a sudden now you got to pay to get in there. Or when it comes to the desecration of cemeteries, especially Black cemeteries, now all of a sudden it's like you got to pay a fee, or it's like it's all about economic progress over the right to rest in peace, or the legal term, the right of sepulcher. It's all if then it comes to the ground, like which grounds are considered sacred grounds, because case in point, Confederate cemeteries, like in Florida, like when they were building this a roundabout, we were going to build a street, and the street plans actually showed that they were going to go through a Confederate cemetery. What they did was that they turned it into a roundabout. So the cemetery is still intact, but now it's kind of like there's a circle, it's a roundabout. So instead of going through the cemetery, you're driving around it. It's like who's considered sacred, what's considered sacred, how that influences the plans for development. It's really, really, just ties it all into like the issue of land justice, which is also why for us, Renee, I remember you asked me this last week, like best case scenario, we win our court cases, we get the land back. The fight doesn't really start for us because we realize now, and we've been realized this, that we're tied up into the liberation struggle. Yes, we may have been able to stop the desecration of Moses Cemetery, but there's still Black communities in Montgomery County being displaced. We still have rampant anti-blackness in our school systems. We are seeing the expansion of the police surveillance state in Montgomery County, which is impacting the Black and Latina populations. All of this just means the fight truly begins, But we are confident when we take inspiration from groups not only like the Panthers, but people like Amilcar Cabral and Frelimo and Michael Manley of Jamaica. We take inspiration, to make sure that we know that we shall be victorious, and that we can have not only a true liberation movement, but also hopefully a pure participatory democratic society.
Yeah, it's a battle, man. It's a battle, but I do appreciate. I really appreciate that as an organization, even though there is a specific fight, there was a real comprehension of how your specific fight feeds into the larger battle that we are all having against systemic oppression. You know, unlike the young conservative on on that show, it's not systematic people. That systematic is not the word. It's systemic. So I couldn't help myself. But I mean, you know, is really important that people start to put these two and twos together to understand that there is a larger problem that exists, that if we don't pay attention and we keep focusing on like like the problems underneath it that are all feeding the larger problem, and that sometimes do get, you know, appeased by these like short-term policies and short-term decisions. You know, it's all fed from a larger overarching problem that is really guiding our total society and how we treat each other, how we are allowed to be treated, how all of the systems work in place to continue to oppress us as a larger body of people. And this is not just about, you know, just Black folks. Like, as you said, I'm glad you mentioned the desecration of you know, native and indigenous lands here in the country too. I always want to remind people, like, all of this is happening, there's all these fights, and the land don't really belong to any of us, right? Like like, like if all is said and done, none of us should really be here talking about any of this, right? So there's such a depth of problem that exists, and I really appreciate that, you know, that as an organization, BACC has made it a point to not just make it about this thing, but to recognize that this problem with regard to this specific cemetery is part of a rooted problem that exists overall, that continues to oppress everybody. You know, I think it's an important thing that people don't often recognize, and that I think most organizations don't actually do, which is a whole other problem, right? But I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that because it's something that I think is important.
Another reason why 40 acres is ass.
Yeah, I can't wait for somebody else to watch this movie so that you all.
I'm watching it today. My babies are all going to be home today for the first time in what feels like forever, and we're gonna. I think that's going to be what we get with. And I don't know what platform. The only one I found it on is
Netflix.
Oh, it is on Netflix.
Is it there? I watched it on Amazon, but
Amazon.
You know.
Okay.
So one of these conglomerate cyber op platforms got it. These conglomerated militarized cyber op platforms got it. So when Amazon is not, you know, providing server space for the CIA and intelligence community, we can use it to watch the questionable movie.
I know. Yeah. It's so hard to escape all that stuff.
It's
man.
beautiful. I think it's beautiful. I'm ready. You know, if it wasn't for Robert and Renee, I'm ready to quit. I'm ready to let it happen. Let's let it wash over us and enjoy the show. No, I'm just playing. Robert, thank you very much, man. This has been great. Yeah.
No problem. Thank you all for having me. And, you know, just one more thing, like, ironically enough, I was surprised that this was on Amazon Prime, but like the documentary Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, you know, about, you know, the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba, who's one of my heroes, you know. If you haven't seen Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat, I highly recommend it. So, but
we have an ongoing fight about that movie, me and Jared, about the
Oh snap! I did not mean to. I did not mean to open up another chapter.
Robert, not everybody sees the light the way you and I do, my man. That's all. What can I say? You know
I
what I
just
mean?
want to. I just want to make sure that Robert is aware that the person behind the soundtrack for the soundtrack, like we got to ask all these questions about this stuff, right? Like, why is the white person allowed to do all of these things? We must ask the question. We must ask the question. And I just want to
it's
be
not
clear,
without flaws. It's not without flaws.
It's not that I didn't actually no, I didn't like it. Let me not tell that lie. But it's not because of the information. It is because of the overcrowding of the information, and I feel like that was intentional. And I feel like there was a lot of stuff he didn't. Yeah, I just feel like there's a lot of stuff he could have done. Like even in talking to you, remember I was all irritated because he brought up some real key information, I think, about was it Gillespie? Somebody who said something about not realizing like why they were there and some history.
Satchmo.
Right. And I'm like, well, why wasn't that included in the documentary if you knew this information? So like these are the things that, and I always, whenever you start talking about like awards and you have all of these like, high level people like saying praising and this is you always have to question why. Like why were they allowed to do the story, but
and I think there was some, I think in Tume raised some of it that it was anti-communist even in its supposed praise of African nationalism. Which but I did appreciate it more than some of my favorite comrades. So it what can you say?
The upside is we can disagree and still talk next week. So it's all
Nope. This is the end of our relationship. We're not gonna make it to 100th show. Any slight disagreement must end all previous comradeship. That's isn't that? I think that's what Mal wrote.
That is.
That's funny.
So we got to wrap soon because it's almost 1:00. And I don't know if I even said this to you, Jared, but I Am Maroon it's the focus of a book event here in Newark. So I'm actually going to see if it's possible to make the dash out there because we had them on, and I think it'll be cool to meet some folks in person.
That sounds dope.
So we'll try to do that. For folks who are unaware, we are close to 50,000. So we've been doing the countdown to get to 50,000. There we go. So there's some shirts now on the channel to to commemorate, and we'll do a whole thing when we hit 50,000. We're trying to navigate it so that we plan the day when we should hit 50,000 versus like it hitting 50,000 and us not realizing it. So we'll get there. But for folks who are interested, please do that. And did I forget anything, Jared? Oh, and then the 100 show, we're gonna do something we've never done, which is the call-in. We've never done a call-in on a Saturday.
We're gonna have a community comment, as it used to be called on WPFW. We're gonna do a community comment show next week for 100th, the centennial edition of Saturdays with Renee, right? Definitely. Centennial of 100, right?
That's it. Yeah. That's it. The colonizers' language, Jared. Go. There we go.
Well, Morgan State, I had to learn a new word a couple of years ago, and Morgan State celebrated its sesquicentennial. What is 150? I think it's how you something like that. I was like, it was like, what is? So I'm still catching up.
Robert, is there anything that we missed? Is there anything that we didn't cover?
No, I think we covered everything. I just know my assignment Monday and Tuesday is that I'm the unofficial honorary reporter for Black Liberation Media on the court hearings, and I'll provide like status updates, for at least 30 minutes,
That would be dope. I think, and I don't know, Jared, how we make that work, but we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out on email how we get that to work, and even we'll come up with a plan, because I do want to keep folks kind of apprised, like how it all goes, like what's the next thing, and is there anything else that people need to step up and do. So
yeah, exactly.
All right. Thank you very much, folks. As another reminder, like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon. That, including the links to Robert Stubblefield's work with BACC, are all in the show description. So please, again, avail yourself of that. The website contains information about the press conferences. We will be in touch and do follow-ups as well. So thank you all very much. To the chat, Robert, to those who will see this later, thank you, and peace. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say. We'll see you next week for the 100th episode of Saturday with Renee.